Thank you very much. So, hi, I'm Mushon. I'm here with, what's written here is that I'm from the Public Knowledge Workshop, which is it's an Israeli NGO working on government transparency and civic engagement. And I've been working with them for the last 7 years. But what I'm going to talk about today is quite different. I'm going to talk about a project called You Are Not Here. And then I'll try to explain this suggestion for a medium called AudioSpatial Storytelling. And then I'll get to the current project called Speculative Tourism. So You Are Not Here. This project started initially in 2006 and then relaunched in 2007 as a tour of Gaza through the streets of Tel Aviv. So this is a project that I've worked on with a group, including Leila El-Haddad, which is a Palestinian blogger and journalist, a documentary film director and media activist. Being a Palestinian from Gaza, she could not visit Tel Aviv, and for similar reasons, I could not visit Gaza. She is also currently not here. And at the heart of this project was this two-sided map. We've created a tourist map of Gaza with some points of interest and interesting tourist locations. And the way it worked is that we printed the map of Gaza on one side and the map of Tel Aviv on the other side. So when you held the map to the light, you could see the streets of Tel Aviv through the streets of Gaza. And when you wanted to visit a location in Gaza, you found the corresponding location in Tel Aviv, you would walk there and you would find a sticker in the street. And when you see the sticker, it had a telephone number and an extension. You call the telephone number, you enter the extension, and you get an audio tour of that corresponding location in Gaza.
We've now reached one of my favorite spots in the city. Home of the ubiquitous unknown soldier statue, or Jund al-Majhoul. The attack shocked me awake in the dead of night, leaving my windows rattling and my heart pounding. Then follow me to Hammam al-Samara, the last public bath left in Gaza. For now, I ask that the men on our tour wait outside. It's women's only hours.
So through this project, we used walking as a medium to retrieve human scale. Like, media in general, the kind of topics that we encounter through media doesn't have a human scale. Like as an Israeli, we hear terms like Gaza and Palestinians and Hamas and terrorism, and it's all like concepts that we do not, for better or worse, experience in our bodies. But we wanted to change that through using walking, and while doing that, we kind of explored and kind of discovered, at least for us, for the first time, and kind of a new medium. Like we've been exploring the audiospatial medium through, and we want to expand it to kind of an open-ended platform. So one experience, and remember that was 2007. 2007, we started in 2006 with a tour of Baghdad through the streets of New York, and then in 2007, the tour of Gaza through the streets of Tel Aviv. And 2007 was the year that the iPhone came out. So that was a way different digital ecosystem than the one that we have today. And I'll get back to that point later on. But I want to talk about this medium, about audiospatial storytelling. So we have VR and AR. We've heard a bit about VR in the previous talk, and now I wanted VR being virtual reality, AR being augmented reality, which is slightly different. When Hollywood imagines augmented reality, it usually looks like this.
Jarvis, you there? At your service, sir. Gauge heads-up display? Check. Photo preferences from home interface. We'll do so.
So it's a layer it's kind of a digital layer on top of reality, which kind of augments reality.
I have indeed been uploaded, sir. We're online and ready. We start the virtual walk
So very impressive and very kind of the image of high tech, right? But this is what Hollywood imagines. What we actually have is so we have VR with VR headsets like you can try here, but there's also augmented reality, and with augmented reality, it's kind of, you can separate it to three types. We have flat reality, we have transparent reality, and we have mixed reality. So what do we mean by that? With flat reality, it's basically windows, kind of digital windows into the world. The most famous one is Pokemon Go. So it's not really something that takes over your full landscape, but you just get to see through another screen another layer. When we talk about transparent reality, the most the example of that is the Google Glass. Rest in peace. So Google Glass gives you information about the park that is in front of you. I am not blown away by this. And mixed reality, which is supposed to be the cutting edge in consumer electronics now, as presented through the Microsoft HoloLens.
Now check out this 3D Shark Hologram.
Really kind of covers your full spectrum, and you can see objects in 3D. It knows where your head is moving, and you can see this shark and get kind of completely blown away by the fact that you have a shark in your living room, or not. I'm not very impressed by the current state of augmented reality, and I think I know why. I think it has to do with this woman, or do you know this woman? Well, maybe. Yeah. Well, it's not really a woman. It's actually humanoid robots, right? Have had a huge problem. I think many of us are kind of weirded out by the robot and not that weirded out by the woman next to it, right? And why? There's a very interesting and kind of weird phenomena called the Uncanny Valley. How many of you have heard about the Uncanny Valley before? Yes, not all of you have heard about it, so you're going to hear about something that I think is kind of mind-blowing. The Uncanny Valley is this phenomena that both Hollywood and the robotics industry have stumbled upon when they've tried to create representations of humans. So the more realistic the representation were, you would go up on the graph to the level that you have a humanoid robot that you can, it looks familiar, it looks like a robot. There's a stuffed animal. You know that the stuffed animal is a doll, but you still feel some empathy towards it and so on. But then, when it becomes slightly too realistic, it falls into the Uncanny Valley. That's where you have the robot that we've seen before. That's why corpses are so scary for us, why a zombie is something scary, why people are weirded out by a prosthetic hand, because it's not something that immediately registers as a representation anymore. It kind of jumps at you as something that, oh, this is not my reality. This is something that I want to reject because there's something wrong here. It doesn't fall within the way that I do pattern recognition on what is normal and what should I not be alerted by. And I would argue that something similar is happening to augmented reality. Because the thing is, our sight is very sophisticated. It's the most sophisticated way for us to analyze a lot of signals at the same time. It's able to process a lot of patterns, and then when we see some kind of interference, like we see in the case of the Uncanny Valley or the spatial Uncanny Valley, we just reject it. It's like, I don't like that, okay? And maybe these devices would go beyond the Uncanny Valley and would go to that other side of kind of the safe shore of complete realism. But in the meantime, I think there's a lot of expectations, but they're not really met. But we talked a lot about augmented reality. We haven't really spoken that much about what it actually is. So augmented reality AR is a live, direct, or indirect view of a physical, real-world environment whose elements are augmented or supplemented by computer-generated sensory input. Are you sure? Okay, that was a false alarm. I'm sorry about that. It's just an augmented reality that we've all experienced now. And we have not experienced this augmented reality through visual. We have experienced it through sound. So augmented versus augmented, I think there's something much more powerful about the way we hear and the way audio kind of sips into our reality. Because our hearing is not as sophisticated, and it's spatial by nature, right? It's affected by space, and it's all around us. And the thing is, it's not even new, right? In 1938, Orson Welles
Ladies and gentlemen, it's indescribable. I can hardly force myself to keep looking at it. It's so awful.
Have published this radio drama of the CBS
kind of V-shape with saliva
about
dripping from
War of the Worlds.
Those quivers,
H.G.
pulsating
Wells'
monster, or whatever it is, can
War of
hardly
the
move.
World.
It seems weighed down by possibly gravity or something.
You probably heard this
rising
story.
up now, and the car falls back. There's seen plenty.
The way it was presented, it was a radio show that is presented as journalism, as news broadcast. And people who have joined the radio show a bit after the disclaimer of this is just a radio show were completely freaked out. And they were sure that this is happening, that there's actually an invasion, an alien invasion, and the sirens were going off like we just heard now, and it led the US to ban fake radio alarms to that level because the hysteria was so crazy. This is 1938, and there was no Google Glass involved in that manipulation. Rather, there was radio. Some keynote effects there. Expect more. So finally, I want to talk about this idea of speculative tourism. We care a lot about the future, obviously, and these days we have kind of more scientific means to predict it. In my own work, I'm a designer who does a lot of work on visualization. I've worked on predictions of traffic to ease pressures on roads, and I work on predictions of energy consumption to help lead a more efficient and clean energy ecosystem. So I definitely think that the kind of technologies that we've developed to think about the future and to kind of predict the future have a lot of potential. Generally, the way it works is prediction algorithms extrapolate patterns and trends from the past into the future, under the assumption that what has happened in the past would probably repeat itself in the future. And we can see that happening, having a lot of value in a lot of fields. And it's used all across the board, and it's also used in politics. Actually, the Remain campaign used a lot of data to argue that that the UK should remain in Europe, and the Democratic campaign with Hillary Clinton was also very data-driven, not only about its messages, but also about its methodology. Like, not only predictions of what would happen politically, but predictions of who would vote for me. These algorithmic predictions have become so dominant that we're kind of used at this point to see these elaborate predictions that if Florida would vote for Clinton, then she needs to only win Ohio, and then she's done, because we already know that other states would go for the Democrats and so on. Like, these have been, we have been saturated with this idea of the future is already set. We're just going to go through it, and it's there. Basically, the statement of both the Remain campaign and Hillary Clinton was status quo. What has happened would remain, or we already know the future, and therefore we're going to act on the knowledge that we have. We're going to act on the knowledge politically. This is pretty much, and things are not necessarily going to get better. This is as good as it gets. It's probably going to get worse. On the other hand, the other campaigns, the Leave campaign, had different messaging. The messaging was about change, right? And if you look at the, ignore the guy in the center, the sign to the left, we want a future, vote Trump. We want a future, meaning we want our future back. In a way, it kind of reminds me of an ethos that is not really identified, not with the Leave campaign and not with Donald Trump, but with the progressive movement. Another world is possible. That is the statement of the progressive left, right? Of the anti-globalization movement and so on. Another world is possible sounds much more like what Trump and Leave were arguing for, or rather, fuck the status quo. It's kind of, and when you think of it, when you look at what is algorithmic prediction or data-driven determinism, as I like to call it, what does it mean politically? Politically, it is inherently conservative. Because the patterns and trends of it looks at the patterns and trends of the past and that will continue into the future. So based on the data we have, we would say another world is unlikely, right? And that is, I think that is a big problem, right? That is a huge problem for messaging that comes from a rational perspective, like the liberals in the US and the Remain campaign in the UK and all around Europe, and in general, I think more and more of the left is trying to use terms that has to do with rationalism and facts and data-driven, and against fake news and against post-reality and so on, because we are grounded in reality, we're grounded in truth. And I'm completely for it. That's like 90% of the work that I do is all about that. But we're losing something. but because we're losing, we're kind of giving up our future, because the machines have already made our future. We just need to experience it. And I don't know how many of you have experienced this reality in real time. This was the kind of gears on the New York Times site while they were counting the votes. I was constantly refreshing my phone until you get this. People were like, this specific visualization drove people crazy. But the problem here is that this is a false dichotomy. A false dichotomy between status quo and reactionism. It's not like the alternative to the status quo is reactionism, and it's not like the alternative to reactionism is the status quo. There needs to be other ways for us to think about the future while using technology, but not, we cannot cripple our imagination because we have computers that can predict some things about the future. And that's the motivation behind the speculative tourism project. This is a project I'm doing with Shalev Moran, and it's widely inspired by the You Are Not Here project. We wanted to go back to audio-spatial storytelling, this time with Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem doesn't need another city to be layered on top of it. Jerusalem is already a city within a city within a city, so many layers within one city. After 50 years of occupation of East Jerusalem, or the unification of the city, if you're coming from a different perspective, we want to think not only about the past, we want to think about the future. The way we're doing that this time is through a mobile app that we're developing that is going to hold different tours of the different futures in Jerusalem, different tours of the future. So you get into the app, you can choose a tour, and then you get locations and timeline, and you can start walking towards one of the locations. And only when you're there in person, the GPS sensor would know that you're close enough to hear that location. So this is one example.
We will travel 1,500 years back in time to the year 2022 and witness the place where Simone the Hermetic began her journey of fulfillment and where it ended with the molecular disintegration of Jerusalem.
Okay, so this is just a small segment from a longer tour by artist Yael Bartana. It starts with, it goes on and off between kind of messianic visions and then post-gender realities that have to do with disintegration, not only of Jerusalem, but of gender, and everybody becomes kind of, no spoiler, but let's say men and women are not the same afterwards, pretty out there. And then just to continue the tour, you've visited one location, you would go to the next location, and once you visited one location once, you can listen to it from anywhere, but the first experience of that location needs to be in the original place until you go and complete the full tour. Now, we've worked with 8 different we have 8 tours by 9 authors: Chagit Keisar, Boaz Lavi, Meiron Rapaport, Yael Bartana, Sarah Blau, Muhammad Beiruti, Racheli Ibn Boim, Sarah Beninga, and Emily Amarusi. We've started that with a workshop. We've invited these authors. They represent a very wide perspective as far as identity, political leaning, religious leaning, and we've worked with them on an authors workshop in May towards a pilot that we launched in June. The pilot is now available. Like anyone in Jerusalem can. There's a layer of future on top of Jerusalem that anyone can access by downloading the app. And we're working with more authors on very different tours and very different directions towards the next iterations of the Jerusalem speculative tourism project. These are the tours that we have in today. You would see that most of them are in Hebrew. There are some in English. We're also working on tours in Arabic that have not launched yet. This is just like some screenshot of how it works. We're currently working with a mobile app that was not a custom mobile app, but a tourism mobile app that have collaborated with us to accommodate the needs of the project. But we are funding pending, working on a new app of our own. I want to talk about two tours that are interesting in this context. The tour that Hagit Keisar have created is called The Return, and in her tour she worked with this building. This building is called the David Brothers Building, and or the Daoud Brothers Building. It continues from the past into the future. The history of this building involved, it was a Palestinian building, and then in 1948, with the establishment of Israel, the family fled during the war, and they were not able to come back. This is not uncommon. In this case, they managed to fight it through court, and they won the building back. So this is one of the irregular cases where the Palestinians got their property back. And she's using that history and continues that into the future. In the future that Hagit is talking about, the building becomes a safe place for refugees from all over the region, after what seems to be a total social and political collapse in the region. Now, on one hand, there's something beautiful about how this building that was all about separation of communities becomes a safe place. On the other hand, to get there in the reality, in the future that Hagit has envisioned, she had to demolish everything that we had, right? She had to go into catastrophe, and there was an apocalypse before something good is built. And I have a bit of an issue with that, because there's this idea that we're thinking about that everything is going to hell, right? This is the dystopian vision. If you just open, just look at what film is playing, some of it would be dystopian. There's such a fascination with the idea that what we have now is good, and we're going to lose it. And I would argue that's also kind of conservative. Like we think about dystopias as very critical of what could happen. Think about the Man in the High Castle, or 1948, or different visions of, oh, it could be so much worse than what we have right now. And I can understand that. But I think there's something problematic about it politically, because it kind of reminds me of this guy, right? So Lenin is thought to have said that the worse the better. The worse it gets, the better it would get afterwards, because we need to demolish what we have now in order to build a new thing, right? So he was thinking about the communist utopia. But when I'm thinking about the challenges that we have today, and the major one is the climate challenge that we have, we don't have the luxury of going through apocalypse before the utopia happens, because the apocalypse is pretty much there. And I promised another keynote effect, and here it is. What we need is something that is gradually moving moving towards towards a better place. Yeah, it might be a bit less inspiring because there's something so alarming and engaging about dystopias, but we really need to start working with utopia, at least as a guiding principle. And that's why I really liked the tour that was published, the audio tour by Two States, One Homeland. This is a grassroots political movement involving both Palestinians and Israelis, some of them even settlers currently living on occupied land. And they're working, in their vision, they're working against separation and for partnership. They're envisioning something like a federation, an Israeli-Palestinian federation that is not rooted in walls and boundaries, but in collaboration and partnership. In their future that is narrated by the movement's leaders, Muhammad Beiruti and Meiron Rapaport speak of a future that is utopian. And they focus on this very contested archaeological site that is currently dominated by extreme right-wing settlers that are trying to hide any sign of Palestinian history and focus on the Jewish history of the site. In the future that they envision, this site is becoming a shared project where both Jewish and Palestinian archaeologists are exploring together each other's history. And you know, the first reaction that I have to things like that is kind of rejection, like, oh, this is too naive. We can't have that. But we have to use these symbols, and we have to explore both dystopia and utopia in order to really map the future, because there is no the future. The future is, we should stop saying the future. There is no the future. There is maybe the past, but there are futures. It's always plural, and we should always consider this idea of plural futures, and that's what we're trying to do with this. I came across this quote that I really like by Galliano. She's on the horizon. I go 2 steps, she moves 2 steps away. I walk 10 steps, and the horizon runs 10 steps ahead. No matter how much I walk, I'll never reach her. What good is utopia? That's what. It's good for walking. And that's why we don't need to reach it, but we need to, rather than look at dystopia and run away from it, wherever we might run away, and we've seen where people are running away from futures that are afraid of. We need some guiding light, and even if it sounds naive, we need to make it sound good. And that's what we're trying to do with speculative tourism. I'll leave you with a quote from one of our biggest inspirations, artist Janet Cardiff, who has been working with audio-spatial storytelling for many years. That's it.
Walking is very calming. One step after another. One foot moving into the future and one in the past. Did you ever think about that? It's like our bodies are caught in the middle. The hard part is staying in the present. Really being here. Really feeling alive. Stop.
Thank you.
Sorry, I've wrapped myself in this because it's kind of chilly in here. Thank you so much, Mushon. I feel like I didn't promise too much saying this would be a highlight of today. We've got some time for questions. You can give me a sign of hand, but I did want to use the opportunity, because we've got a couple of minutes left, to have a little bit of a chat about the work that you've just presented. I'm particularly personally also excited to see you present this, because I remember last year in December, we were part of another event called Designing Tomorrow. And to have a
slide for that here. So if we can get the screen back.
Can we get the presentation back, please? Perfect, thank you. Oh, wonderful.
We have not planned this at all, right?
This is
not just one bit.
It is a little bit actually spontaneous, but it's really nice that you prepared this to put things into context a little bit. So if you'll allow me, I'll just say a couple of sentences about Designing Tomorrow and then pass it back to you. Me and another friend, a mutual friend of ours, Zer-Aviv, who you see up there in the picture next with me, decided to host an event bringing together our communities from the Republica and his community from a festival that he's been hosting in Tel Aviv called Utopia, and bring the sort of brightest minds from our two communities together in order to have a futuristic workshop employing a method called backcasting to think about desirable future outcomes. So often, when we come together and speak about the future, we end up designing dystopias or speaking about very negative, undesirable outcomes. And since Uri is the science fiction expert of the universe, basically, he deals a lot with visions of the future, and we decided to design this event and bring two people together, as I said, with the aim of really thinking about desirable outcomes and trying to sort of get our mind into a positive mindset. And I remember we sat down there and had a first conversation of, wow, would that not be one cool sort of concrete idea to use this kind of, you know, so we have this in Berlin, you have a pillar somewhere and you press a button and then somebody tells you something about the past, but exchange that with some voice of the future. It seems like so much has happened in the meantime, an incredible journey. How did you manage to whip all this up?
and I like the fact that we're talking about Designing Tomorrow now, because that has been one of the big inspirations for this project. Mainly because we were 5 groups working on different futures or different topics that needs to be imagined in very kind of extreme way, rather than just extrapolating of what we have now. And as someone who was involved in one of these workshops, we really enjoyed working and imagining that future. But then when we kind of looked at what everybody has done, most of the groups, to imagine a better future, had to go through dystopia first, and including my group. And I was like, oh, I didn't even notice that. Like, I don't actually want to go through that route to reach something better. And
I'm going to share this for a minute, because I really liked it. Was very humoristic and very sad at the same time, because I think your group came up with a apocalypse that led to this utopian future where we had all become cyborgs and basically needed regular updates to keep our operating systems running. And one of these updates was bugged with a faulty set of feelings, of emoji, basically, that were being implanted in the human system. This led a large portion of humanity to die. And this was the apocalyptic scenario before you turned into your utopia.
Yeah, later on, there was a need to share updates and stuff like that, but you remember it better than I do. Anyway, that was one inspiration, and we're currently working on the next Designing Tomorrow event, where, inspired by what we've learned from the previous event, the working title for now is Cancel the Apocalypse. This time we're going to ask people deliberately to think towards really better futures. And I think beyond just the fiction experience, it's also a political calling. Like, we always feel, you can't go wrong by being dystopian. You can always say, okay, so I envision horrible things would happen. And if they happen, I told you so. And if they didn't happen, I worked. Because I've said it, it didn't happen. because I was the first to identify and warn. But if you're envisioning something good would happen, you're putting yourself on the line. It's much more brave politically to envision better futures, because then what if it doesn't happen? Did you not work hard enough? Or what if it happened and it didn't happen the way you wanted it to happen? You basically ruined everything. It's really something that has been challenging me politically, especially as someone living in Israel, where I have tendencies towards dystopia. I need this for my, to be able to continue work politically and to really understand what I'm doing with technology, because I really feel like I've mentioned that the way we've been using technology to think about the future has really crippled our imagination.
And it seems banal, but it's quite profound. It's like people say, oh, if you're in a bad mood, you should smile at yourself in the mirror. And this is kind of an intellectual smiling at yourself exercise, because thinking about a positive version of the future really actually does something to your mindset, rather than sort of realming in everything that's going to go horribly wrong all the time. Are there questions in the room? Would you like to give me a sign of hand? I'm going to go up there first and then come over to you.
Thanks for a really fascinating presentation. I was just wondering, when you went to your various writers, what did you ask them to do? What was the project? How was it described to them, and what was their kind of remit?
So I described, we were hunting them one by one. Really, we tried to look for people who we knew had very different visions for the present of Jerusalem, and had a connection with the city itself and with the politics of it all. And we have to understand that Jerusalem is not just one city. Jerusalem is as you probably know, it's kind of the center of the whole conflict on many, many layers. But when we turned to them, we invited them basically to a workshop where we would ask them to go through this process of starting to create these tours. We used both the tools of backcasting that we used in the Designing Tomorrow workshop, and we used other tours to try to think of multiple futures. Rather than one future, for each one of them, they had to use different axes of scenario planning, like using tools from really different fields, and try to think where do they want to situate, what happened with the world between now and then, and then they had to start walking backwards from there to try to imagine the process, like how did we get there, and what's interesting, I think, about that was different from the work that we've done in Designing Tomorrow, is that the perspective was very personal, because you're hearing it in your ears and it's narrated by a voice. It's not like in the year la 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 la. It's more like I'm going to do this now, and there was one tour that was actually a women's protest against. For women's rights in public space. There was another tour by this Orthodox Jewish guy who was who was being followed by a group of journalists that he was asked to guide them towards some meeting that none of them really understood what was going on. But then the chit chat as they were walking there was a part of you could explore the world that they live in through that. So the perspective is very personal, and again, it's back to experiencing the story in human scale. The idea that you move in the space that, in one of the futures that is, it's not less viable than any other future. That would be the experience of walking in the street.
And there's another question over here.
Hi, thank you, Mushon, for your talk. I dig you and share your approach of being positive about the future, creating a utopia, and then think about what we can do to reach this utopia. But what I'm curious about in your research, what position, or have you ever thought of the value of dystopic visions? For example, 1984 could serve as a warning sign, and it does for a lot of people. And it is a dystopic vision that you are, as I say, you said before, we need utopic visions. But what does those dystopic visions, do they have any account?
Definitely. I think what dystopia does is mark a certain chain of events that we should avoid, and definitely there's a lot to learn from that, and there's a lot to try to think. It's very useful to think of how do we not go there, but I think we should use a plurality of futures, and some of them definitely should be dystopian. One of the developments that we in kind of the roadmap of the speculative tourism project is to allow visitors to record their own not reactions, but actually perspectives within a future that they visit. So let's say they're presented with a future that might seem like a utopia for a very specific group of people, because there are a lot of utopias happening in Jerusalem, but they're not. They don't necessarily think about every resident of the city. But if a utopia like that is presented to you, let's say a utopia that where the third temple is built on top of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. This is like one of the things that some people in Jerusalem are super excited about it, and the rest are completely terrified by. We would like to have the opportunity to say, okay, you've just heard this author presenting this utopia. Let me give you the perspective what happened 5 years before from my perspective, being, let's say, a secular resident or a Palestinian resident. How do I fit within this future? So I think utopia and dystopia are binaries in themselves, and we always live between them. But we need to understand them more like a force of attraction and a force of detraction, and try to understand how can we use both to steer ourselves towards futures that might be more desirable.
Are there more questions? I think that's a very profound point that you made. And of course we need measures to operate in, but the complexities of visions of the future, the complexities of human beings, and there never being one outcome. Mm-hmm. This idea that we need to stop thinking about the future as one future, but as a set of possibilities. I thought that was a really good point to make and to close on. I have two more questions for you in case no other hands go up. One, can you tell me, can you do a little bit of shameless advertisement and tell me when Designing Tomorrow Utopia is going to be happening this year, and is it free for everybody to go and attend?
So it's going to be in December, about mid-December, if I remember correctly. I don't think we're completely sure about the process of applying, but there has been an application form in the past, and there will be an application form in the future.
This is if you want to speak there.
In Designing Tomorrow or Utopia?
Utopia.
So Designing Tomorrow is one of the events in the under the wider Utopia umbrella, which is a festival for science fiction, fantasy, and horror. It started as a film festival, and it really expanded from there. You should look it up, Utopia, Utopia Festival, if I remember correctly, or you can just I'm not one of the organizers of Utopia, so that's why I don't remember the URL. But you can look it up. Just DuckDuckGo it.
And you're right, last year we organized Designing Tomorrow as a closed event, which is possible for you to apply to. So if you're interested in this kind of setting or this kind of methodology, you can come and speak to either Mushon or myself and get connected in case you're either, interested. There's, of course, all open methodologies in learning more about those and using them yourselves, or also, perhaps even coming and joining.
Yeah, and the same with speculative tourism. Like we're starting with Jerusalem, but we're really interested in taking that concept to other cities.
That was my next question.
Is
this an open format?
You want to ask?
Yes, I would like to ask.
Okay, what's your question?
Is this an open format? If somebody got inspired here today saying, I would love to experiment with this.
Well, I was just about to say that. So yeah, it is an open format, and we're trying to not perfect it, but develop it to the level that we understand, like how do we get people to think very openly about different futures, and how what are the right prompts, how to get to become better at audio-spatial storytelling. How do you direct people? Like kind of respond. Like one of the tours had to do with separation of Jerusalem. It was a dystopia, but presented as a utopia. A separation of Jerusalem, not to the east and west cities, but to the upper city and the underground city, basically pushing all of the Palestinians into this high-tech underground city. And the amazing thing that Sarah Benning did there is that the locations that she chose are locations where there are diggings right now. So you go, and it's a construction site, and you see like a huge hole in the ground, and she's presenting, in the future what's actually going to be there, right? So we're really working in trying to find new techniques for this medium.
Great, and you're going to be with us today and tomorrow in case people want to come and tap your brains on how to do that, maybe add and adapt what you're doing. Excellent. I'm going to do a couple of housekeeping announcements before I let you go, but let's give Mushon another big round of applause for his great talk.
Thank you very much.
So we're about to break for lunch. You might find one of these in your seat pockets. So in case you want to inform yourself on what is available for lunch from your way from here to the cafeteria, you can scan the little menus that you can find in your seat pockets. We're going to be back here at 3 p.m. for our 2 afternoon talks. The first one is going to be on taxation. But I promise you it's going to be not a boring talk, but an informative and entertaining one. And the last session we have on the topic of housing crisis is going to be open and public. So if you've enjoyed today and you feel like you want to bring a friend along for this afternoon, you're very welcome to do so and invite them to come on over for that public session. After we end with our sessions here today, we have an evening program prepared for you that is a walking tour starting at 5:30 through Dublin to experience the city a little bit, maybe a good point of inspiration to keep Mushon's talk in mind. Excellent, I will be too. And then tonight at 7, we would love to see you all in the Cobblestone Pub for some music and some pints and good conversations with us. So thank you very much, and see you back here at 3. Yay.